Yeah, I mean, this is very reminiscent of like the API boom, in terms of like the feverish like interest in the space and like all of the activity. I mean, like I'm sure you guys weren't even doing this like 2 years ago or something. So it's it's most similar to that.
Sounds good. So should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. Okay. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Generative AI Meetup podcast. We have a really exciting episode today. We're with Carter today, who is a developer relations manager. I don't know how to describe your exact position. I mean, head of developer relations.
Sure. I mean, what do titles mean, right? I think what matters is, I work in developer relations at DataStax.
Okay.
And I spend my time thinking about how we can, serve developers and help bootstrap their journeys into generative AI.
Awesome. So would you maybe start off by giving a little background about yourself? Like, who are you? In addition to your title, and like, what do you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so my name's Carter Rabasa. I work at DataStax now, but I've been in the tech industry for over 20 years. Back when computer science degrees were like necessary things to getting into this industry, I graduated with a CS degree, worked as a software engineer for several years. And personally, like, I realized that this was not my destiny. I couldn't close my eyes and imagine myself being some kind of senior software engineer, like in my future. So I went through what a lot of people do I went through kind of a career shift, went to grad school, and then got hired by Microsoft out of grad school. And this is back in the late 2000s. Right during the financial crisis, for people that are old enough to remember that. So it's I felt pretty lucky to be getting hired anywhere. And Microsoft I'm from the East Coast in the U.S., and Microsoft was what brought me out to the West Coast. So I live in Seattle now, and I moved back to Seattle back in 2009. Anyway, I don't want to rattle on for too long, but I quickly found out within a few years that being in marketing was also not something that I was excited about. I missed the code. I missed being part of technical conversations. And I think, like a lot of people, like, I had a lot of like anxiety and self-doubt about like, where do I fit into the world, right? Like, I'm a technical person. I love working with code, but I love lots of other things that are involved in the technology industry, like, marketing, business, like how products are created. And that was when I discovered DevRel. So I personally discovered DevRel in 2012 when I left Microsoft to go work for a company which at the time was unknown. It was called Twilio. And everyone laughs about that now. But back when I joined, when I told all of my colleagues and all of my peers that I was going to work for a company called Twilio, they first of all confused it with a real estate company called Trulia. And then when they Googled it and looked it up, they totally couldn't believe I was joining a company that did phone call API stuff. They thought I had lost my mind. So that was back in 2012. So I joined Twilio, and that's where I learned about DevRel. And I was on the early DevRel team at Twilio for a little over 3 years. And Twilio was one of the companies at the time that was really like reinventing DevRel in terms of like what it means. And post Twilio, I've had other kinds of jobs. I actually transitioned to being a product manager at the company. That's actually not as uncommon as you think. Like when you're in DevRel, you are engaging with developers on a daily basis, right? You're talking to developers. You're understanding what they like about your company's APIs and platforms, but also like where they get stuck and like what things are bothering them. And I collected 3 years of those stories, and I ended up moving over to product to help fix those problems from the product side. And now I'm at DataStax. So I lead our DevRel team. So I had a couple jobs after DevRel. None of them were as interesting or as fulfilling as DevRel. So I kind of found my way back to this space. So I'm kind of back in DevRel, and I'm loving it.
That's really cool. You worked at Twilio around 2012, because I think I was at my first internship around that time. This was in Chicago at like a healthcare startup, and we were doing some kind of a patient triage intake system. So I built a voice chatbot using Twilio, and I think at that time, Twilio was the gold standard for developer documentation. It was fantastic. When I was at another startup after that, it was like trying to build our documentation to model Twilio's aesthetic and like how clean and polished it was. And now I think a lot of startups have taken that framework. Like I think Stripe is beautiful documentation, and no one cared about that in the past, I think.
Yeah.
And now I think it's becoming.
But I can kind of and by the way, I'm sorry. Like I love the topic, and I tend to ramble, but like I can explain that quickly, right? Like, and by the way, Stripe was a contemporary of Twilio. Like Stripe inspired a lot of the stuff we did at Twilio, and I hope that we inspired them. But we were doing these things at around the same time, and Stripe has been super influential in their own way. Stripe and Twilio and many other modern platform companies approach building the product, everything from the APIs themselves to the documentations to the quick starts to DevRel to those kinds of things. They approach it from the perspective of like, if we make it as easy as humanly possible for individual developers, no matter what company they work for, to use our product, adopt it, play with it, do things with it, we believe that if we do that at scale, like we will be successful as a business. That we will that these developers will become our advocates, and they will push up into their companies the usefulness of Twilio like as a solution to a problem. That is completely different than how software and platforms and like APIs were sort of marketed and sold in the past. You know, in the 80s or the 90s, like it was a top-down model where a salesperson would sell something to some kind of purchaser, like at a target company, a CIO or a CTO. The conversations would happen at a high level, and then the company would purchase the platform or the product or the database, and then they would basically tell their developers, all right, everybody, here's what we're using, with no input from them, right? Like that was the old way of like how things worked. And unsurprisingly, oftentimes like the developers would be on the receiving end of things that were hard to use or had bad documentation or didn't work properly because the people making the purchase decision weren't necessarily technical enough to understand that, right? And that's where you just sort of ended up in a really bad place. So companies like Twilio and Stripe and, you know, DataStax today, they're approaching this from the opposite angle, right? Where it's like, hey, if we build the right thing for developers, the people who are actually writing the code, like they will help us, you know, sort of make the case inside of these companies that like this is a great solution to what we're trying to do. And yeah, so that's it's kind of modern. And of course, like now you see startups, like it's almost taken as gospel, right? Like, you know, and most startups, you know, coming out of YC or just getting started these days, like they kind of understand like the value of approaching developers in this way. But even today, like it's not universal. Like you can go find APIs and platforms that like really have really bad documentation or like really confusing quick starts. So I think it's like more popular than it used to be, but it still isn't like pervasive.
That legacy approach of top-down sales brings to mind companies like Oracle, SAP, and some of these big tech giants where, you know, you sell these massive products and these companies get locked into their ecosystem and make it really hard to switch, regardless of what the developers at that company want.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like it's, you know, I think this is the right way to sort of build products and be successful. Like I'll kind of concede that like maybe there are instances where, you know, you can get away with doing it the other way, but that's not the kind of company that I want to work at, and that's not the kind of like product that like I want to work with, right? The DevRel, to me, people ask like, what is DevRel? Like, what is, you know, what do you do? Like, what's the point, right? Like to me, DevRel is all about helping developers be successful, like completely regardless of like whether they're you know, an individual hacking on something in their garage or whether they work at Ford Motor Company. Like DevRel is, you know, kind of like revenue agnostic. Like we're just trying to help developers be successful. And that ethos tends, you know, over time has fantastic business like outcomes, because sometimes that person hacking on something in their garage like turns into Foursquare. You know, or even when they don't, that developer ends up getting a job, you know, at ESPN, right? I mean, like, understanding, and by the way, like, no, even when those people don't necessarily go on to work at companies that that are huge revenue possibilities, because they're still developers, and the kind of feedback that you get from them because of course all the things I'm saying about like the product being easy to use and the documentation being clear, like these are aspirational. Like you're never done. Like you're always trying to make it easier and clearer and faster to get started. So even if you forget about, what it means to the business, like you can still get fantastic feedback from developers, and you can turn that around and provide that to product and engineering teams so that they can build and ship better products. So that's kind of how I think about DevRel. And I think when you look at like the DevRel programs and teams that like really make a difference and have a big impact, like I think that you see those things in common.
Yeah. I think that's a really good thing. I mean, as you mentioned, I think there's always the kind of the delicate balance between who is actually purchasing software and then who is using it. And I think that it's an awesome thing when the people selling the software like are able to focus on the actual end user and not necessarily the person who's making the purchasing decision, because I think that helps breed success in the long run. So anyways, right now we are at a hackathon where we are we pulled you aside, and it's all about RAG, retrieval-augmented generation, and generative AI, and we are planning on using, and a lot of people are using some of DataStax products like AstraDB, for example. Could you maybe just give like a 50,000-foot overview of like what is AstraDB and why would somebody maybe want to use it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I guess, for the people who are listening that don't know what RAG is, or maybe don't remember because there's so many acronyms flying around, like what is retrieval-augmented generation? It's just the idea that, if you can visualize an iceberg in your head, like there's this classic like meme or image where like the majority of the iceberg is under the water, right? If you think of the tip of the iceberg that's above the water as like publicly available information, right? This is the stuff that Google crawls. This is the stuff that OpenAI scrapes to build their LLMs. There's 10 times or 100 times more data that is not public, that's under the waterline, and the LLMs are not trained on and have no ability to sort of have access to. So the point of RAG is to figure out, well, crap, like if my company has, like thousands and thousands of like financial reports, and I want to create like a conversational natural language interface to ask questions such as, what was the total revenue in APAC, in Q3 of fiscal 2023? Like you can't ask that you can't ask ChatGPT that question. ChatGPT doesn't know. So the retrieval part of the augmentation is like, okay, well, what if you could pull relevant private information and feed that as context to a language model like ChatGPT, where it could actually like format a reasonable and accurate answer to that question. So that's what RAG is. AstraDB is a NoSQL and vector database. But let's focus on and those two things are super important, right? Like AstraDB can contain and hold all of your normal application data. So for the developers, on the call, or the non-developers too, right? Just imagine any app you would want to build, like, a Twitter clone or a Yelp clone, or like whatever you're trying to build. Think of all the data that you need to like build that app. Astra can handle that data, right? But Astra can also handle vector data, right? So it's sort of a 2-in-1 solution for developers. So how does a vector database, how is it relevant to RAG? Well, in the scenario that I just described, someone asks the question about revenue in Q3 of 2023. In order to implement RAG, you would take that text and you would run it through a language model to create a vector. And then let's assume that we have vectorized all of these financial documents that I'm talking about, and we stored them in Astra, like with the textual stuff that was vectorized along with the vectors themselves. Then, so you have this vector that represents the question you're asking, and you can use that as input to Astra's vector search. And you can say like, hey, here's a vector. Give me the 10 or 10, 5, 10, or 20, documents that are most similar to this input vector, right? And that's the magic of vector search, right? And that's the magic of large language models, right? Like large language models, like are, they're the reason that like the word dog and the word cat can actually be related to each other, even though they share like none of the same letters, right? So let's say we're going to get back the 10 most similar vectors. But as part of this vector search query, we're also getting back the text. We're getting back like the words about, about the revenue and the Q3 and all these things. We then ask any language model you like, but like let's assume it's OpenAI. We then feed that textual context with the question, the actual text question that the user asked. We feed it to OpenAI, and through the magic of their chat completion API, with the question that was asked and with the context that we provide, we get a really accurate, reasonable answer. So that's what RAG is, and that's kind of why you need a vector database in order to do RAG. Like, I said a lot of words, but just like think of it like this. If you didn't have RAG, you would sort of have to try to naively package all of the content of all of your documents into the context window for your call to OpenAI. And as anyone who has worked with OpenAI, they just know that like the amount of data you can fit into context is limited, right? And if you're dealing with like thousands of documents or maybe hundreds of thousands of documents, you end up hitting the limit. So the vector database lets you narrow down the documents that you then can feed OpenAI as context and just get better answers.
Yeah, we had a chat with Yiding from Llama Index before this, and he mentioned the same thing and pointed out that garbage in, garbage out. So if you feed in irrelevant data to ChatGPT in the context window, it's going to take that irrelevant information and try to give that in the answer. So this retrieval-augmented generation is kind of like a filtering step too, to give you more relevant info and then remove the irrelevant info when giving an answer. Yeah,
you'll hear jargon, like hallucinations and stuff. Like, I think it's okay. That's like a reasonably descriptive word, but the machine is not like hallucinating. It just doesn't know, right? You're overloading it with irrelevant data. It doesn't know that the data is irrelevant, and it's kind of making this best effort to construct like an answer for you. So anything that you can do as a developer to like provide like the most relevant information and context as possible will cut down on those kinds of like situations.
So we've talked a lot about like the technical intricacies of like RAG and like AstraDB. But let's say I'm not a developer and I just want to say like, what types of things maybe like will I see coming in the next few years built on this technology? Like, what are some of like the use cases that you think that maybe RAG can help build? And what are some cool use cases that you've seen maybe like, in testing or that you've seen people implement at scale that you think will potentially, see their way into consumer applications in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to say like it's insane how early. Well, like we're here having this conversation because AI and generative AI is exploding, right? I mean, people. I haven't seen this kind of excitement since the AI boom or the API boom. Back in 2010-ish, that era. It's really intense, but it's early. It's like so early. I mean, the number of, I say like production grade generative AI applications that like I have installed on my phone or that I use on a regular basis is pretty limited.
So we talked a lot about AstraDB and a lot of the technical intricacies of it, right? And I think what a lot of people want to know is what are some of the actual use cases that you would see being built out into the world, right? So maybe something that you've some sort of use case that you think could be built based off of the RAG technology, or something that you've seen built. So not everybody's a developer, not everybody's going to necessarily use it, AstraDB, but a lot of people want to potentially use it maybe indirectly, even without maybe knowing that they're using Astra DB under the hood. So what types of use cases do you think that we're going to see in the near future, or maybe that are coming out now that regular users will be able to see?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it's, we're here because the amount of excitement around AI is off the charts. I've never seen anything like this. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. Like, sort of version of this was the API boom back in about around 2010 and thereafter. That was Twilio came out, Stripe came out. It felt like every weekend there was like an API hackathon where people were going crazy trying to glue together various APIs to create new things. That is what it feels like now, right? Like, people have these incredibly powerful tools, these language models and these vector databases and these orchestration layers, and they're incredibly powerful. And everyone is trying to figure out, great, what can you make? It's just so early. I feel like we're in the first mile of a 26.2 mile marathon. But I will say this: there's software that I use right now on a regular basis. There's a startup. I'm not sure where they're located, but they're called Glean. They have sort of, I don't know what to call it, except that it's an insanely powerful search capability for a company's private data. I can go, and we use it here at DataStax, and I can go to Glean and I can type in your name, and it knows exactly who you are. It will pull up your profile. With one click, I can kind of look at where you are on an org chart. But it also indexes all of our Google Docs. There are a bunch, all of our Jira tickets. It's sort of plugged in to all these data sources, so I can ask all kinds of other questions and get back incredibly reasonable, good answers. I'm incredibly impressed by Glean, and Glean is clearly the definition of RAG. They are. I won't pretend to understand all the implementation details, right? I'm just a user. I'm just using Glean, but it's incredibly impressive. So that makes me feel super optimistic about other interesting things coming out, maybe from a consumer perspective. I'm convinced that I have two kids. They're in middle school. I'm positive that by the time they're in high school, or by the time they're young adults, they are going to be interacting with software and applications using conversational natural language. And they will, and I think that anyone who has kids that are younger, if you have a kid, if you're out there right now and you've got a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, those kids aren't even going to be aware of a world where you use software by selecting from drop-down menus or clicking radio buttons. That will be hilariously antiquated to this next generation of users. In terms of stuff that that has actually been built, I mean, that's what a lot of what me and other people at DataStax are working on. A lot of my team's job and responsibility is to build demos that actually inspire developers about generative AI. Look, I don't know how people feel about crypto, and I'm not gonna say anything about that, right? But crypto had a lot of hype. There was a lot of skepticism about it. Some people chose it as a line of work, and a lot of those people are now doing something else. I understand why today people have not everybody, but some people have the same attitudes about generative AI. Is this real? Is it a fad? Personally, I never got into crypto, but I have now chosen to get into generative AI. So I don't think it's a fad, but I completely understand why a reasonable person who's been around the block a few times might have questions and might be wondering, how real is this? So it's my team's job to help inspire them by showing them real examples of stuff you can do. So for instance, just in the last 2 months, we built 2 awesome demos that illustrate RAG and illustrate what you can do. So we built for funsies, we built a Taylor Swift chatbot back in December. Well, we built it in literally 7 days. Because we wanted to launch it in time for her birthday. So her birthday was December 5th. If you're a Swiftie out there and I got the date wrong, don't be mad at me. But we launched it on her birthday, and the whole idea was we wanted to build a chatbot that was like it represented a Taylor Swift superfan. So not Taylor Swift herself, right? We wanted to build a chatbot where it's like it represented a superfan that knows everything about Taylor Swift, including like when her next concert is, where it is, like everything about her discography, like, you know, what the lyrics of certain songs are. Like that's the kind of stuff that we loaded into Astra and that we trained the chatbot to be able to answer questions about. And that's it was not only was it fun to build, but like it's fun to play with, right? And I think that like creating fun and relatable software experiences is part of what you need to do to inspire developers and to show them it's real stuff. All the code's on GitHub, right? It's all open source, right? There's no smoke or mirrors. Like you could clone it and change it and make a Metallica chatbot or like whatever you care about. The other demo that we built that I'm just really proud of, and it's even more of a real world use case, we built a Wikipedia chatbot where that is, I don't know how many developers know this, but Wikipedia has a real-time server-side push API where you can build software and you can receive real-time updates from Wikipedia every single time an article is edited on Wikipedia. So not only can you sort of like load Wikipedia into a vector database in the first place, you can keep it updated in real time as Wikipedia itself is changing. Like anyone who has used Wikipedia or like knows anything about it, I mean, there are thousands or tens of thousands of editors all over the world that keep it up to date, right? So, you know, if you want to build a chatbot that is trained on Wikipedia, like you can't take a snapshot in time, right? You need to continue to update it as Wikipedia itself changes. And it was really awesome. And we were able to build this chatbot and sort of illustrate how you can ask Wikipedia. Like one of the things that's like frustrating for me about Wikipedia is that like, if you go to wikipedia.org and you try to like ask a question, you know, like what is the population of Washington State? Like you'd be stunned at like how bad the search results are, right? And people consider Wikipedia to be like, I don't know, one of the top 5 most authoritative sources of knowledge in the world. So yeah, like, you know, I think like working and we're currently like in the process of, this is just something that we built on our own with off-the-shelf APIs, but you know, we want to work with companies like Wikipedia to like bake that into the product, like to actually like make this something that's real that people around the world can use to get their questions answered. So to me, like those are like one of the Taylor Swift is sort of a fun, silly example, but hey, look, man, a lot of really cool apps and companies like think of like TikTok. Like I remember when TikTok came out, like I thought it was kind of dumb and goofy and like who cares? And next thing I know, it's like it's the fastest growing social application in the world, right? I think generative AI has the potential to help developers and startups create those kinds of new experiences. But I'll be honest, like I don't know what they are, because if I did, I'd quit and I'd go raise a round and I'd build it. So like I think part of being at a platform company is being really humble about like my job is to make sure that we're building the best possible Legos for developers to use to build these amazing things. And to, of course, like when it doesn't work as advertised or when it feels like it's confusing or they don't know what to do, to fix those problems. But you know, you said we're at a hackathon, right? Like we're at a hackathon because, the API vendors like don't know what the next cool thing is, right? Like, and that's what's so awesome about hackathons, right? Like not everyone's going to build the next TikTok, but like one person might. I've been going to hackathons for well over a decade. And, over that time, there are at least a dozen actual startups and companies that have spun out of these hackathons that like still exist today. So it happens all the time. And it just feels really good to support developers that are kind of like on day one of like that startup journey.
The example of Wikipedia you mentioned was really fascinating. I would like in my mind, I feel like that's something that only the top tech companies can do. OpenAI, Google, to index like the entire corpus of Wikipedia. Do you know off the top of your head how much data that was? How big the vector database that you created? How long it took to index that, and if it would be feasible for like an individual developer, a hacker to do that?
Yeah. So it's I'm not sure. Like I know for sure actually. Hugging Face, like has like a snapshot database, snapshot of Wikipedia. I'm not sure if we used their snapshot or used something else. It's huge, but it's not as huge like as you think relative to like other data sets. For the WikiChat demo that we ended up shipping, we actually decided to focus less on the whole corpus of Wikipedia and more on the real-time updates. We've actually built multiple Wikipedia demos. Like there's one demo that did ingest like the snapshot that we had and like let you ask questions. There's another demo where we trained it on just the most popular pages, and then we wired up these real-time updates. I would say though, you're exactly right. I mean, there's sort of a difference between going from a fun demo or a demonstration or a hack to getting baked into Wikipedia, right? That requires resources, commitment, and it requires like Wikipedia's like involvement, right? Like, they need to be, when people land on the actual website or the actual application, like it isn't enough to sort of have the capabilities like in the background, right? There has to, you actually have to figure out like, how do you change the interface, right? Like, how do you actually create new ways for people to ask those questions? It's like, it's super exciting. I mean, this is like early work that's just getting started. But I think it's also just a great example. I mean, like Wikipedia is like one, when you start to think about like what other data sources are out there, right? I mean, like think about Yelp reviews, like think about like, Foursquare recommendations. Like there's just all these people have been talking about big data for, I don't know. I mean, let's just call it 10 years. I mean, maybe more, maybe less. It's hard. It depends on how you describe it. And companies like DataStax and others have been building these big data products. And I think one of the things that has just never been unlocked is like, okay, like we have big data, we know how to store it, but like, what do you do with it, right? How do you unlock the data? And I think up until now, like nobody has had like really great ideas on how to do that. And I think now that's changing. So now like developers, companies, startups, like there's just so much opportunity to like figure out like what all of these data sets are and like what are the ways in which you can create completely net new value by unlocking them and like remix. Like what about, I mean, we're like talking about these things in isolation. Like, well, what if you could like merge, factual Wikipedia information with like some other kind of data set, right? And then ask conversational like questions like about those two things together. Like I'm just like pulling things out of the air, right? But I think this is the place that people are exploring, right? And there's also there's also like I think we talked, I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but you asked a really like great question about maybe low code or like, hey, like what does generative AI mean to, non-developers or people that are, I don't know, they're like semi-developers, they're people that can like open up a code notebook and kind of, piece through some of the Python. Like, what does the world mean for people like that? And I think it's amazing, right? I think that like there's a lot of vendors that are working in this space, Llama Index, other people, like they're not necessarily making net new software possible, but they are like productivity tools. Like they are enablement tools. Like they're making it easier to build generative AI experiences. They're making it more repeatable and like faster, or more accessible, right? Like I'm positive that there are a raft of no-code platforms that are going to be coming out in the next few years. They're going to be completely optimized for people that are technical enough to like envision a problem, find a data set, and wire these things together. They haven't been built yet, right? Or maybe people are working on them right now, but I think that's going to be like completely fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree. I am convinced that the future of programming, maybe not like immediately, but 10 years from now, it'll essentially be one person just prompting the computer at like a product developer, and it'll just be built. I think that's like the days of us like actually like going into like a text file and
right.
Writing Python code. I think those days are numbered. Maybe for the people who want to eke the last bit of performance, but I think like for the average developer, we're going to see that. I don't think the technology is ready yet. I think it's there for some smaller programs, but I agree with you. I think that is like one use case that we're going to see in the future for sure. Anyways, it seems like you have a lot of experience with developer relations. So let's imagine I'm a person who maybe was thinking about developer relations and it's something that I want to get into. Do you have any advice for those type of folks who maybe want to be in your position one day for developer relations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's an amazing job, right? But I would be super clear, like it's really easy to like test out of it, right? Like, first of all, you just, if you want to be in developer relations, like you have to be a developer. There are people in companies that like don't understand that principle. A lot of DevRel teams sit in marketing organizations, including mine. And there's sort of a thought that like, oh, well, we can just kind of grab someone who's like a little bit technical and we can sort of put a developer relations t-shirt on them and they can do DevRel. Like, no, you can't. And there's a really good reason for that, because the number one, not the number one, but like one of the critical characteristics that you have to have for being in DevRel is you have to have tremendous empathy for developers. You should have tremendous empathy for humans in general. Like if you find yourself not really caring about people in your life, or people that you encounter in your life, you're not gonna enjoy DevRel, right? Like DevRel requires you to like almost instantly like have care about another person like getting unblocked, unstuck, being successful. So like you have to have empathy. But you also have to have developer empathy. Like when someone comes to you with their laptop and they're showing you an error in Visual Studio Code, like you can't just sort of be like, oh, that's interesting. I have no idea what that means, right? Like real empathy comes from walking a mile in someone's shoes, from sort of totally relating to like the problem that they're having, and then of course being technical enough to helping get them unblocked, right? So that's a great way to like test out, right? Like if you're not a developer and you haven't been the kind of person that's gone out of your way to help other developers like without it being your job, you probably just won't like it, and you won't be a good fit for it. So great. So once you kind of establish that, like where did DevRel people come from? They come from technical jobs that you all are familiar with, right? They come from engineering. They come from like technical support. There are plenty of people that have been in technical support roles at API or platform companies that where they're spending literally every day helping developers debug some error message or something that's wrong with their app. Those people often get into DevRel and do really, really well. Sales engineering and DevRel are like kind of highly related, right? Like a really good sales engineer is sitting down with another developer at a company that you're trying to sell a product to and helping them figure out how to build the thing or build the prototype or get unstuck, right? So there's just a bunch of different flavors of engineers, of engineering roles that like are feeders for DevRel. If you've never worked in tech before, okay, cool. Like, just a computer science degree, graduating from a boot camp, like the normal paths that you would think about using to get into an engineering role, those can be reasonable paths for getting into a DevRel role. And then, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, once you've kind of identified that you think that you'd be good at it and that you would enjoy it, I mean, I think I said this earlier. I mean, the core function of a DevRel team is to sort of serve developers and like help them be successful. So that's just what you would be doing on a daily basis, right? Maybe part of what's awesome about being an engineer is that you yourself get to build amazing things. And maybe you feel really satisfied about that, right? DevRel is a much more humbling role, right? Like the definition of your success is other people being really successful and playing a small part in doing that. If that is something that you could get excited about, sort of like serving other people and helping them sort of be the stars, then yeah, DevRel's for you. If you're the kind of person that thinks that DevRel is some kind of vehicle for becoming a minor celebrity on Twitter or accruing like a lot of followers, and there are plenty of DevRel people out there that operate in that way. I think eventually, like, you'll find it dissatisfying, right? Because ultimately, like, it's just not about me, and it's not about the DevRel people. It's about the community of people that they're trying to help and support. I feel the same way as an organizer too, right? Like, when I'm not DevReling for DataStax, like, I organize the Seattle JavaScript Meetup. I organize a conference called Cascadia JS. And my attitude about these community events is like, the less time I'm on stage, the better. And the more time the speakers are on the stage, the better, right? Because that is who people have come to see. That is who people have come to learn from. I prefer to fade into the background and just like make sure that everyone's having a good time, and that they're enjoying themselves and getting value out of these events. And I just think if you're listening and that kind of sounds like you, like you're the kind of person that stays until the end of a meetup, and without being asked, you help an organizer stack chairs. Like, if you've ever done that in your life, like, you might love DevRel. If you're the kind of person that goes to conferences and events and, like, I don't know, has never once even considered volunteering or helping out, DevRel might not be for you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. So that's pretty much all the main questions I have. Shashank, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's it. What I was going to ask, is there anything else that you wanted to plug? Or maybe one thing that came to mind was you mentioned how Astra DB handles both NoSQL and vector stores. So are there any other tools in the DataStax portfolio that we could piece together to make a more rich experience?
I mean, DataStax has like a lot of different products. Like, there's a really cool streaming product. I'd say I think it just completely depends on what you're trying to build. I think for folks that are listening, like, I think really like we launched the vector capabilities for Astra DB like less than a year ago, like maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago. So they're like relatively new. There's a brand new data, like, developers will see this when they check out our docs. Like, there isn't just one API for interacting with Astra. There's several, and some of them are more legacy than others. But there's a brand new data API that we launched pretty much exclusively for like JavaScript and Python developers. I think we launched it in preview 3 or 4 months ago, and we just went GA like 2 weeks ago. And this API is completely designed for people and developers building in generative AI. It's like optimized for sort of, inserting all of your information without needing to worry about defining sort of your data model or your schema in advance, inserting your vectors, running these similarity searches on the vector store. Honestly, like, I don't want to plug anything. Like, if I had to plug anything, I would really ask everyone, please, like, spend an hour trying to build a simple RAG application, right? It's like, people talk about this stuff all the time, right? You just like, you can talk about RAG and Gen AI, and like, I don't know, you can kind of navel gaze and like, read Hacker News. Like, every day and every week, the tools get better, and it becomes easier and easier for people to actually build something in like 30 minutes or less. So my only ask is that everyone who's listening, who is a developer or a semi-developer, like, go find like a good tutorial. Like, we have a bunch of really great tutorials on our docs. Like, whether it's us or somebody else, like, go build your first RAG application, and like, see what you think, right? See if it was easier than you thought, or maybe it was harder than you thought, right? But just go do it. Because I think the thing about generative AI, all these new technologies, like, same with crypto, same with all this new stuff, people talk about it, people read about it, but a lot of people silently assume it's too complicated for them. So like, they talk about it, they read about it, they think about it, but they don't do it, right? They're like, that's too complicated for me. I want people to go try and do it and sort of find out whether they're right or wrong about that. In terms of DataStax, in terms of like what we're building, like, all of all of the company's energy, and certainly all of my team's energy is focused on Astra and like vector, right? So like, go check it out. I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of developers this weekend about their experiences building on Astra, the things they liked about it, the things they didn't like about it. Like I said, this is like mile 1 of the 26.2 mile marathon. Like, Astra is going to keep getting better, but it's only going to get better if people, if we get feedback, right? If we sort of see we see what people are trying to build, right? Like you can't imagine how challenging it is to build Legos and to build platforms when you don't have clarity on like what the use cases are, right? Like you just don't know what people are going to try to build and what kind of like limitations they're going to run into. So every day we get smarter about what people are actually trying to build and how we can optimize Astra to sort of serve their needs. So yeah, and it's just really exciting. So I want everyone, to go try to build their first RAG chatbot. And if you can't, or if it seems like it's too hard, reach out to, the folks, who are hosting this podcast and as a community, I mean, it's as a community, we all need to kind of come together and build resources, right? Like we need to build, web pages that have like links of like, tutorials and guides and like, we're all learning together, right? And some of us are a little ahead of others and we just need to kind of help people catch up. But it's just, it's really exciting. I want people to try it with their hands and see what they think.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo the same thought. There's tons of examples, tons of meetups out there too. So meet folks in person or even online. I think DataStax is a great AI chatbot starter example on GitHub. Check that out. It's like I remember seeing a tweet that said, if you think you're late to the game now, it's like saying you're late to the internet in the 2000s. So still a long way to go. And this is really exciting.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, guys.
Much appreciated.